Can leaders be weak? Do perfect leaders fail? Is there a forbidden leadership skill? These three questions reveal the one leadership skill that no one talks about in hustle culture, but every leader desperately needs. And most are terrified to use it. Today, we're going to talk about vulnerability, the very thing most leaders think makes them weak, but actually makes them unstoppable. For years, I bought into the myth that great leaders have it all figured out. They don't show cracks, they don't admit mistakes, they certainly don't let their team see them struggle. Our modern culture of hustle has sold us a lie, that vulnerability equals weakness, that admitting you don't have all the answers makes you less effective. But what if I told you that the leaders who seem the strongest are actually the ones brave enough to show their humanity? If you're new here, my name is Jared, and I'm a high school teacher turned leadership coach. I'm on a mission to help leaders like you develop themselves and their teams without burning out, settling for mediocrity, and focusing on what matters most. I spent years studying this topic, particularly Brené Brown, and then I practiced this in my classroom with my team and eventually at home. I failed miserably multiple times, but what I discovered through all that failure and practice changed how I lead. And with that said, let's dive into this video. The first point is that vulnerability is not weakness. It's your most accurate measure of courage. Let's start by debunking the biggest myth in leadership. Vulnerability equals weakness. Here's what Brené Brown says in Dare to Lead. There's not a shred of empirical evidence that vulnerability is weakness. In fact, she defines vulnerability as uncertainty, risk, and emotional exposure, and calls it our most accurate measure of courage. Think about that. Every time you step into the unknown as a leader, whether that's admitting you don't have all the answers, giving critical feedback, or launching a new initiative, you're being vulnerable. You cannot control the outcome, but you show up anyways, and that's courage. Brené Brown continues in that same book. Our ability to be daring leaders will never be greater than our capacity for vulnerability. Your leadership ceiling is determined by how much vulnerability you can handle. So when you avoid vulnerability because you think it makes you look weak, you're actually capping your own potential. You're trading real strength for the appearance of strength, and your team can tell the difference. If vulnerability is actually courage in disguise, then why do so many leaders still avoid it like the plague? Before we get into our next point, I don't want you to just hear these ideas. I want to help you apply them. So I made a simple one-page guide that includes key insights from this video, some self-assessment questions, and discussion questions you can bring to your team. Download it now using the link in the description below or the QR code that I have on the screen. So the second point is that vulnerability doesn't mean oversharing. It means leading with boundaries and trust. Here's where most leaders get it wrong. They think vulnerability means dumping all of their struggles, insecurities, and emotions on their team. It does not mean that. Brené Brown is very clear about this in her book, Dare to Lead. She says, quote, "Some of the most daring leaders I know have incredible vulnerability rumbling skills and yet disclose very little. It's not about how much you share. It's about how you show up when things get really hard." Brené Brown also warns us that vulnerability minus boundaries is not vulnerability. It's confession, manipulation, desperation, or shock and awe, but it's not vulnerability. So what does healthy vulnerability look like? It means admitting when you're wrong or when you don't have all the answers, without making your team carry the weight of your anxiety. It means asking for input and feedback without being defensive. It means showing up authentically without oversharing details that your team has not earned the right to hear. In her book, Daring Greatly, Brené Brown says, "Vulnerability is based on mutuality and requires boundaries and trust. Vulnerability is about sharing our feelings and our experiences with people who have earned the right to hear them." So if you're wondering, how vulnerable should I be? The answer is as vulnerable as your team can handle and as vulnerable as your role requires. Not more, not less. But here's the thing. If vulnerability done right builds trust and courage, what happens when you consistently avoid it? And that leads us to point number 3. When you avoid vulnerability, you kill creativity, trust, and innovation. This is where the cost of avoiding vulnerability becomes crystal clear. Brené Brown writes in Dare to Lead, "Without vulnerability, there is no creativity or innovation." Why? Because there is nothing more uncertain than the creative process, and there is absolutely no innovation without failure. You see, when you hide behind your armor, when you pretend to have it all figured out, when you shut down feedback, when you avoid hard conversations, you don't just hurt yourself, you hurt your entire team. Here's what happens. Creativity dies. Your team stops bringing ideas because they're afraid of looking foolish. Trust erodes. If you won't admit mistakes, your team won't either, and that kills accountability. Innovation stalls. Fear of failure becomes the default setting. Nobody takes risks. Back to daring greatly, Brené Brown says, vulnerability begets vulnerability. Courage is contagious. When you lead with courage, when you model what it looks like to show up even when you don't have all the answers, you give your team permission to do the same thing. And at that moment, that's when breakthrough happens. On the flip side, if you lead with armor, your team will armor up too. And armored teams don't grow, they just survive. So if vulnerability is this powerful and avoiding it costs you this much, what's the next step? Well, the next step is to start to practice this. However, ideas are easy to hear but hard to implement. And like I mentioned earlier, I created a resource for you called Vulnerability in Leadership Guide. I built it with you in mind to go do some practical things with these ideas. Download it now using the link in the description below or the QR code that I have on the screen. In this video, we discussed why vulnerability is the leadership skill no one talks about but everyone needs, so that you can lead with courage, build trust with your team, and unlock creativity and innovation without losing respect or authority. If this resonated with you and you want to help implement these ideas with your team, grab the resource in the description below. If you want a super practical breakdown of how to actually practice vulnerable leadership without oversharing or losing authority, check out this video that I'm going to put right on the screen. If it's not here yet, hit the subscribe button to get notified when it comes out. Otherwise, I'll see you guys right over there in that video.